Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is G. You're watching Allastrology. And we're going to talk about retrogrades. Retrogrades. We've got some questions on the channel. And I I'm going to try. It's just Mercury right now. I'm kind of going to try. I think that's what I was trying to say. I'm kind of going to try to answer the question about retrogrades and also talk about the Saturn retrograde that began on the day of the June new moon, June 17th, 2023. So we're going to show a chart. But before we get into that Saturn retrograde chart, and we'll discuss its cycle as far as where does that begin? What does it go back to? And then when does it get back to where it began its journey? That's important because that would be everything I just described is considered like its rerun zone, its redo zone, its shadow zone. And we'll talk about that. And we'll talk about the dates that are involved in that because when we're in the midst of a redo zone, hence the word redo, hence the word taking another look, hence, right? We're going over something. We're retracing our steps, right? Now, how does that differ from your birth chart, right? You got your birth chart and you're looking at it and you're like, okay, this has a little R. Or you might have a chart where it doesn't even have an R, but the numbers might be in red. And so someone told you, hey, that means it's a retrograde, right? That means it's a retrograde. So what does it mean if you have retrograde planets in your chart? Well, there's a lot of different theories. And like there's a term, not even a term, but people will say, well, if you've got 3 or more retrograde planets in your birth chart, your natal chart, then they kind of refer to your chart as a retrograde chart. And that just means there's a lot of retrograde energy happening. But what the hell does that mean? Well, think about this. It's not like when you think about it, it just makes sense. Let's put it like that. Very simply, it just makes sense. So, retrograde, I described the retrograde zones, right? And I described it as like a redo, right? As like an area that we're going over again, meaning we've already been through this before. We've somehow already experienced or witnessed or thought about or talked about. We somehow already had, it's familiar territory, but there's something still that can be learned, or there's something still that we didn't get all of the information of, like, pretend it's a course that you're studying at school and you kind of took the course and you did good, but you know how even if you do good, sometimes you feel like, maybe you could have done better had you spent a little bit more time on it, or maybe you just passed by the skin of your teeth and you're like, damn, I'm surprised I even passed. And so then, like, you kind of forget about it, right? Because you don't really use it. It's one of those classes where I know there's something flying around, where you don't necessarily use the stuff you learn. And so if you don't use the stuff you learn, you tend to forget about it, even if you thought you learned all you could, right? So the point of those shadow areas in your life, those retrograde zones, they're shadow zones. And that doesn't mean they're bad or that it's not like a good or a bad thing. It's simply an area of your life. And so when I say area, you're pinpointing this planet's in a retrograde. It's got the R or it's got the red numbers. What house is it in? What sign is it in? So those two little things right there give a lot of information. And so I'm going to use the chart of the moment for the Saturn retrograde, June 17th. I want to use that chart as an example. We're going to pretend that it's a natal chart. Okay. We'll be like, hey, this is someone's birth chart. So let me get it on the screen. So now this chart, I'm going to find the Saturn, and just so that we're clear, different softwares, different charts may look a different way, which is why I said they're either going to have the letter R for retrograde or the numbers might be in red. On this particular chart, Saturn is actually right here. So we're going to go like this. We're going to go large, supersize me. There we go. We got it. And see, it shows the numbers in red. And then you see there's some other numbers for some other objects. They're in black. Those are moving direct. They're going forward. Retrograde is moving backwards. Okay. So Saturn began its retrograde at 7:12, but before we even get into that, we're going to pretend that this is your chart. And again, it doesn't have to be your Saturn that's a retrograde. We're using Saturn just as an example because the overall meanings are going to differ with each individual planet and the sign that it's in. I know it's complex, I know that. But there is one general explanation. How about that? There's one general explanation you can add to the specifics of the planet that you're looking at you have in your natal chart and you're like, "Oh my god, I've got a retrograde. What does that mean?" So here's typically what it means. It means that for you, this is an area of your life that you really totally and completely think about, even if you're not conscious of it. Now, I say that because think about this now. We've got a Saturn in Pisces right now. So if this was someone's birth chart, Pisces can make things be very blurry and confusing. And we're just like, huh? Is that really what's going on? And so it's considered the subconscious Pisces. It's considered that area of our life that it's more like when I'm in a dream state or I'm sleeping. So there isn't a one size fits all explanation except for the one that is this is an area of your life where you are more internalizing this energy. You follow? It's more internal. And what does that mean? It's internal. It can be with your feelings, it can be with your thoughts. I mean, think about internal, right? Sometimes we have like just these knowings and we can't even associate it with, well, I'm empathic. And so I get these, get these, I get like information in type of thing, or I get, messages. It's not that sort of an internal thing. It's a thing where it's like this charted example. Saturn, someone's got a Saturn retrograde in Pisces. So their responsibilities, Saturn, their duties, Saturn, something they work at because it has to do with their long-term goals, Saturn, which may be dreamy, Pisces. Pisces, they may only dream about them. Like even when they talk out loud, oh, I could only dream such a thing. I had a great comment under the video the other day, and the comment was talking about Saturn, and it was talking about Capricorn, and well, Saturn rules Capricorn, but they were talking about Jupiter as well. And they were explaining that for them, because their Capricorn energy is in their 12th house, Pisces is the ruler of the 12th, Neptune and Pisces, right? So it's the same keywords. So for this person, they were explaining how they even said, I don't have any long-term goals. But then they went into detail to explain to me they want a house in the country with horses. You see? Like that's their dream. I want a house in the country with horses. And as a matter of fact, right now, I am far away. I'm not even in my homeland. They said they were in Romania and they were working with children with horses. Children, family, home. Horses, Sagittarius. In a place that is not my homeland. Sagittarius, because Jupiter rules Sagittarius and it is the ancient ruler of Pisces. And long-term goals, home. I want horses. Like this was their dream, but yet it's tied into their dreamy 12th house where their Capricorn was located. Capricorn's ruler is Saturn. You see, it's all about being not just a super detective. Like, you got to be thirsty to be on like a scavenger hunt. You got to remember that movie. What was that movie? It was with Nicolas Cage, and I think, yeah, it was all about oh, come on, I know you people know it. And he was so great in that movie. He was all about finding the secrets and the clues that were left behind and then being able to connect it to other things, right, that happened in history. And National Treasures or some shit like that. I forget the name of the movie, but anyway, it was kind of like where he was on this major treasure hunt and he was connecting the dots to things that were legit, that like were historical and dates, but he was smart. He knew his history. Astrology is history. Another subscriber said something to me just the other day because I was saying, I'm not a history buff. That's not my thing. I'm not into talking about the past, or not unless it has something to do with how I'm moving forward and into the future and growth and elevating. Like, that's just the way that my mind is wired, right? And so they said, well, wait a minute, G, you're into astrology. And I said, absolutely. And they said, but astrology is history. And I said, yeah, it is, isn't it? Because the ancient ones are the ones who tracked the history of the stars and the planets. The ancient ones. It wasn't just by looking up in the sky and tracking them with the dates. They did all that, but they also understood. They could see how it expressed, how it showed up in the material and the tangible in our day-to-day life. And they jotted that shit down. They were writing history, right? And so they left a legacy, is what they did. They left a freaking legacy. And so they taught us the history of the stars, which is so beautiful. So beautiful. And Saturn rules time. So it's a very relevant example. Saturn rules time. This is father time. It's stuff that can't be done quickly. It says we're going to slow things down. These are your duties and your responsibilities. There's no shortcut. And so if we are in our birth chart, if we have this, we're internalizing it. We're sitting here saying to ourselves, okay, I could either be thinking about it all the time, but in a dreamy way. So I might even be writing about it or writing music or making up a story or a fantasy, right? And if it's Saturn, this can be somebody who could be masculine, right? Masculine energy, maybe even my dad or some authority figure in my life, somebody who somehow could give me the rules and was like, these are the rules you have to follow. It's, Simon Says, remember, like, this is how this goes. The law of the land. These are the rules, right? So in Pisces can be a little dreamy and a little confusing. The rules might seem to be like, hey, wait a minute, they only apply to one but not the other. What's going on here? That doesn't make sense. I thought they were the rules, right? And that's what rules were all about. So then if you're looking at your chart and you're realizing you internalize this, right? It could be emotionally you internalize something depending upon what planet we're talking about that's a retrograde in your chart, depending upon the sign that it's in, and then the house number that it's in. So for this chart, this is in the 7th house in this chart. You see that? This Saturn retrograding is in the 7th house. So this would be with significant one-on-one relationships. So any retrograde planet in your chart, other than it being internalized, for many people, well, the rule for retrogrades in general is they are even more intense in their meanings. So if you have a retrograde Saturn, your rules and the responsibilities involved with significant one-on-one relationships, and this can be business partnerships. Very serious energy. Saturn is extremely serious. And so when a Saturn gets serious, even more than usual, that's when it starts to retrograde. It gets even more serious. So this is a person who would be very serious. When if it's in their 7th house, this could possibly be their partner is extremely serious and likely male and maybe older, very possibly older than them. And even if they're not older chronologically, they present to be older in some way. They may be smarter, wiser, more worldly, more educated, whatever it is for you. If this was your chart and your seventh house is Saturn and it's a retrograde and it's in Pisces, there might have been a little dreaminess about your partners, but Saturn sobers Pisces up real quick, especially when it goes retrograde. So if you've got a Saturn natal retrograde, birth Saturn, right? Or any planet, whatever planet's in your chart, and it is in a retrograde moment because that's where it was when you were born, it intensifies the meaning of that planet. So you got to know the meaning of that planet. Then you got to know the meaning of the sign. And then you got to go back to the meaning of that planet and you got to think, okay, it's double that. It's wham, bam, I'm getting 2 and 3 doses of that. So because Saturn is strict, Saturn is about the rules. I'm being a little bit more intense here with Saturn, right? I'm saying strict, right? Authoritarian, absolutely. Saturn is more about, it's very rigid. It is very cold. It can be very harsh. The thing is, if somebody's got this in Pisces, it's a nice little mixture because it truly sobers up the Pisces energy. Remember, Pisces is very dreamy, very much about a fantasy. It's like, oh, whatever. We don't really have to do that, do we? Like those rules don't really apply to me, do they? Yeah, it's on again, off again. Sometimes it's wishy-washy because it's the fish, right? And it's pretty dreamy. It's pretty dreamy. And it likes things that are going to be a little on the blurry side. Like my partner switches up, meaning it doesn't have to be the physical partner, but like my perceptions of them. Remember, Pisces, wearing the rose-colored glasses. Yeah. And possibly a partner who can literally change up, which is because it's a very mutable sign. They're very changeable, very switching, right? They can kind of fluctuate. They go with the flow of the water, right? Very, very fantastical sign. Maybe a bit dramatic for sure. But remember, Saturn, if it's there and if it's in the red, meaning it's retrograding, the Pisces meanings would likely lessen a bit because this becomes more pronounced. This would become more pronounced. And so we internalize it, meaning we may not even talk about it with people. It may be like this constant thought that we have. We might be going over things over and over because we internalize the crap out of them. Right? We can't, it's like that already, the ABC gum, right? It's already been chewed upon, but you keep thinking about it. You're internalizing it. Maybe you journal about it. You might feel like, God, I'm obsessed with this thing. It keeps going on and on and on in my mind, right? And so for retrograde planets, we say that it's internalized and it's intense. It's intense. So once we recognize it, once we recognize the meaning and the keywords for that planet and the sign it's in and the location of it, we then can find out, aha, this is that. I didn't know that. And it's so great when you can identify it because then you can deal with it. And it doesn't mean, that it's bad or horrible. Like a lot of retrogrades can be really awesome, especially a retrograde in Pisces, because with Pisces, it's hard to deal in the 3D. Pisces is more 5D energy. It's ethereal. It doesn't really have shape and form. Saturn is all about shape and form, long-term goals, ambitions, but the hard, tangible stuff, the sticks and the bricks, the job, the money, the long-term, tangible security, material. If I can hold it, I own it. That's Saturn. Pisces is like, oh, I'm about the spiritual riches. So you see, these two are really kind of very different, very different. So when you mix things that are very different together, depending upon other things in your chart, it could end up being this wonderfully beautiful, complex recipe that absolutely is delicious, especially after time, right? And once we get a little bit older, it becomes very unique and just beautiful, just very beautiful. That is to explain what happens when I have a retrograde planet in my natal chart. It intensifies the meaning of that planet. It's like a double, triple dosage serving of those keywords for that planet. And you likely internalize a lot of it. So I hope this helps. If you're interested to hear more about the Saturn retrograde, we're going to do that in a part 2 because I realize this is already 20 minutes. So come on back because we'll do that in the next one. Below the video, I'll have all the degrees for those of you who like to pay attention to the degrees in your chart. Again, if you don't know and you want to know, just comment below.